All right, so I want you to picture this. It's the morning of January 15th, 1947. We're in Limer Park, Los Angeles.
Hmm.
A woman is walking with her 3-year-old daughter past this vacant lot. It's just a normal, sunny morning. She sees something white in the weeds.
And at first she thinks it's a mannequin.
Exactly. She genuinely thinks it's a discarded mannequin. It's pale. It's broken. It's even posed in this very specific, strange way.
Mm.
But then as she gets closer, the horrific reality sets in. It isn't a mannequin at all. It's the body of 22-year-old Elizabeth Short.
And just a warning for you listening, the details here are pretty graphic, but they're absolutely essential to understanding the media storm that followed this.
Right.
The body had been severed at the waist, drained entirely of blood, and then posed with her hands over her head. Her face had been slashed from the corners of the mouth all the way to her ears.
It's the literal stuff of nightmares. And today, history knows this victim as the Black Dahlia. But, and this is a really big but, we aren't doing a true crime deep dive today. We aren't here to play detective or try to solve this murder. We're looking at what happened next. Because the reaction to this crime, the media frenzy, the public obsession, it tells us something profound about how we consume fear.
Exactly. If you look at the immediate aftermath, the behavior of the press was arguably as shocking as the crime itself. Reporters from the Los Angeles Examiner managed to track down Elizabeth Short's mother, Phoebe, in Boston.
And this part, when I was reading the source notes, it just absolutely blew my mind. They call up this grieving mother who doesn't even know her daughter is dead yet. And they don't. They don't break the news gently. They trick her.
That's right. It's one of the most cynical moves in the history of journalism. They told Phoebe Short that her daughter, Elizabeth, had won a beauty contest.
No way.
Oh, yeah. They spent time prying personal information, childhood anecdotes, all these details out of her under the guise of writing a celebratory profile. Only after they had their scoop, after they had extracted every single ounce of content they could, did they finally tell her that her daughter had been murdered.
That is cold. I mean, that is just ice cold. And they even offered to pay her airfare to L.A. to help the investigation. But that was a lie too, wasn't it?
It was. They just wanted to keep her away from the other papers. It's manipulative, it's cruel, and it really sets the stage perfectly for what we're unpacking today.
Which is this relationship between media, sensationalism, public anxiety, and how we as a society define threats, especially when those threats seem to involve young people.
So on the stack today, we have a deep dive into the Black Dahlia case itself, specifically looking at the press coverage. Then we have this fascinating thesis by Kathleen Marchese comparing the New York Times from the old yellow journalism era to the modern day. And the results are wildly counterintuitive.
And finally, a massive dissertation by Judy L. Castillo on moral panics, which spans from, 1938 to 2010?
It does. Our mission here is to figure out if this media circus is really a modern invention or if we've just always been this way. And more importantly, why do we seem to cycle through these intense periods of panic, usually focused on what teenagers are reading, watching, or listening to?
So let's go back to 1947, the Black Dahlia. You mentioned the reporters tricking the mom, but the sensationalism didn't stop there. I mean, the nickname itself, the Black Dahlia, it sounds like something right out of a pulp fiction novel.
It does, and there's actually a dispute over where it came from. Some reports claim that local drugstore staff coined it because Elizabeth Short wore sheer black clothes, and they were kind of riffing on a popular film at the time, The Blue Dahlia.
Okay.
But other sources suggest the reporters, specifically a guy named Bevo Means, invented the name to hype the story.
It's branding. They were branding a murder investigation like it was a movie release. And then you have the missing week. So Elizabeth Short disappears on January 9th. Her body is found on the 15th.
Okay.
And the press just went wild trying to fill in that gap.
They treated it like a creative writing prompt. There were unverified sightings everywhere. The Biltmore Hotel, the Crown Grill, everyone wanted to be a part of the narrative. And this morbid fascination reached a level of absurdity with the confessions.
Right, the confession.
Over time, more than 500 people have confessed to the murder.
500. That seems statistically impossible.
It is impossible, and some of those people who confessed weren't even born when the crime happened. It just shows how the media narrative creates this kind of gravitational pull. People want to insert themselves into the famous story, even if it means admitting to a gruesome homicide they didn't commit.
And the killer, or, someone pretending to be the killer, was playing along with this too, right? Sending letters to the papers.
Yes, the Black Dahlia Avenger letters, they were sent to the Examiner, made of words cut and pasted from newspaper clippings. It was just so cinematic. Whether it was the killer or just a hoaxer, they were communicating directly with the press, not the police. They knew who the real audience was.
This era you're describing,
Yeah,
this is what they call jazz journalism. Yeah.
that's right. It's the successor to the yellow journalism of the Hearst versus Pulitzer days. Jazz journalism in the 1920s and on into the 40s was defined by its focus on murder, sex, and scandal. It was all about selling papers through shock value. It was, arguably the tabloid era on steroids.
Okay, so jazz journalism sounds chaotic.
Yeah.
And looking at the Black Dahlia coverage, it feels incredibly sensational. If I asked you, the listener, right now, is the media worse today or back then? I feel like most people would say, oh, it's definitely worse today.
Of course.
We have the 24-hour news cycle, clickbait, algorithms designed to make us angry.
That is the common assumption. We tend to view the past, that sort of black and white era, as more dignified. But this is where that study by Kathleen Marchese comes in, and the data just completely flips that narrative on its head.
I love it when the data proves us wrong. So Marchese compared the New York Times front pages across 3 very specific eras, right?
Yeah, she did. She looked at the yellow journalism era, so 1895 to 1904, then the jazz journalism era, 1920 to 1929, and then what she calls the modern era, which was 1995 to 2004.
And just to remind everyone, that modern era covers the Clinton-Lewinsky scandal, so there was plenty of potential for sensationalism there.
A lot, yes.
So straight up numbers, who had more sensational stories on the front page?
The past wins, hands down. In the yellow and jazz eras, sensational stories made up about 15% of the front page coverage.
15%, okay.
In the modern era, it dropped to roughly 5.6%.
Wait, really? So the New York Times is actually less tabloidy now than it was in the roaring 20s?
In terms of the volume of those stories, yes. We actually read less tabloid trash on the front page of the paper of record than our great-grandparents did. But there is a catch.
There's always a catch. What's the twist?
Marchese also analyzed the style of the reporting. She used a scale to rate how startling or emotional the writing was. And what she found was that while the modern New York Times runs fewer sensational stories, the stories they do run are rated as significantly more startling and emotional than the stories from the yellow journalism era.
So fewer scandals, but the ones we get are written to hit us harder in the gut.
Precisely. This study suggests that modern reporting is more professional in tone, generally, but it uses a treatment that is just much more emotionally charged. We've traded volume for intensity.
That makes so much sense. It really feels like every headline today is designed to trigger a specific emotional response, usually fear or outrage, even if the topic isn't, a murder trial. It's all about engagement.
And that emotional engagement is the fuel for what comes next, because sensationalism doesn't just sell papers, it creates anxiety. And when you have enough anxiety floating around, you get what sociologists call a moral panic.
Okay, let's unpack that term, moral panic. This comes from the Castillo dissertation in our stack. It sounds like a great punk band name, but what does it actually mean in a sociological sense?
It's a concept that was popularized by Stanley Cohen back in the 70s, and basically it's when a condition or a person or a group emerges and becomes defined as a threat to societal values.
Okay.
The media depicts it in a really simple, recognizable form. Public concern builds up incredibly fast way out of proportion to the actual threat, and then authorities feel like they have to respond.
And there's usually a folk devil, right?
Yeah.
A bad guy we can all point our fingers at.
Exactly. The folk devil is the group we demonize. And as Castillo's research really highlights in the post-war era, that folk devil is almost always related to youth culture.
Let's look at the first big one in her timeline, the comic book panic of the 1950s. I honestly find this one kind of hilarious in hindsight, the idea of Batman as a public enemy. But at the time, people were genuinely terrified.
It was no joke to them. You have to remember the context. It's the 1950s, post-World War II. There's this massive anxiety about juvenile delinquency. Parents felt like they were losing control of the next generation.
And the villain in this story wasn't a person. It was a psychiatrist, a Dr. Frederick Wortham.
Right. He published this editorial called Puddles of Blood. He claimed that you couldn't possibly understand juvenile delinquency without looking at the, quote, pathogenic influence of comic books. He thought they were literally causing children to become criminals.
Pathogenic? Wow, like it's a virus.
He even suggested that comic books were weakening American society and potentially aiding communism.
Of course. If you don't like it in the 50s, it must be communism.
Yeah.
So what happened? Did they ban Batman?
It went all the way to the Senate. Senator Estes Kefauver held hearings, and the pressure was so intense that the comic book industry essentially panicked and just censored itself. They created the Comics Code Authority to sanitize everything. They didn't want the government to step in, so they stepped on themselves first.
It's amazing how the industry just folded like that.
Mm-hmm.
But fast forward to the 1980s, and we see a similar panic, but a different outcome. The music lyrics panic.
The porn rock panic.
Yes. Dee Snider in a courtroom. I love that footage. But the players were different this time around.
The dynamic was slightly different. So in the 50s, it was grassroots magazines organizing parents. In the 80s, the Parents Music Resource Center, or PMRC, was led by Senate wives, women like Tipper Gore, who had direct access to political power in Washington.
Washington wives.
Exactly. They wanted to sanitize music lyrics. But unlike the comic book publishers, the music industry didn't retreat. They realized something crucial.
What's that?
Controversy sells.
Right. The parental advisory sticker didn't stop kids from buying the album. It became a badge of honor. It was like, oh, this one is the good stuff.
And the industry used that controversy for profit. It's the fascinating shift in how this so-called folk devil fights back.
So we moved from paper to vinyl, and then in the 90s, we hit the digital age. Panic number 3, the internet and cyberporn.
And this was a huge shift. In the 50s and 80s, the fear was about what the kid was going out to buy, going to the newsstand, going to the record store. In the 90s, the fear was that the red light district was entering the home through the computer screen.
And the politicians trying to regulate it had absolutely no idea how any of it worked.
None whatsoever. The Castillo dissertation points out the irony that the legislation like the Communications Decency Act, COPA, was passed by politicians who knew far less about the internet than the very youth they were supposedly trying to protect.
It's the classic old man yells at cloud scenario, but with federal laws attached.
But notice the shift in the narrative here. In the comic book panic, the youth was the delinquent, the threat. In the internet panic, the youth becomes the victim, the prey for online predators. The anxiety shifts from my kid is going to hurt someone to someone is going to hurt my kid.
That's a really subtle but important distinction. And then we get to the 2000s, and the panic seems to get, I don't know, oddly specific, the F word.
Taboo profanity. The Parents Television Council, or PTC, emerges as this moral moderator. They started using these traffic light ratings to warn parents about indecency on TV.
The source material brings up this interesting class angle here, that this anxiety about cursing is often described as a middle-class problem.
Yes, it's about respectability. The research suggests that the obsession with policing language, specifically the F word, is a way for the middle class to distinguish itself. It's not just about protecting kids, it's about maintaining a veneer of civilized behavior in a world that feels increasingly chaotic.
So, okay, we got comics, rock music, the internet, swearing. It's a cycle. Every single generation finds a new boogeyman. But why? Why are we so obsessed with what teenagers are doing?
This is where we really need to synthesize all these sources. Castillo argues that society constructs adolescence in two completely contradictory ways. It's a double-sided coin.
What are the two sides?
Side one is the victim, the innocent child in the walled garden. This is the kid who needs protection from the scary world, from cyberporn, from abductors, from bad words.
And side 2.
Side 2 is the deviant, the juvenile delinquent, the super predator, the kid who reads a comic book and becomes a murderer, the kid who listens to heavy metal and starts to worship Satan.
So the teenager is simultaneously a helpless baby and a dangerous monster. That seems pretty confusing for everyone involved.
It is, and because they occupy this weird liminal space, they become the perfect canvas for adult anxieties. When society feels unstable, what sociologists call hegemony and crisis, we clamp down on the subcultures that represent change. And that is almost always the youth.
Hegemony and crisis. That sounds heavy.
It just means that when traditional values feel threatened, we panic. And this connects directly to the concept of the risk society.
Okay, break down risk society for me.
Well, think about the modern world. We face these massive, terrifying risks that are completely out of our control. Nuclear war, environmental collapse, global economic crashes. These are huge, abstract fears. You can't just go out and fix climate change on a Tuesday afternoon.
Right, I can't stop a nuclear bomb with a protest sign, necessarily.
But you can take a comic book away from your son. You can put a filter on the internet. You can ban a song with a bad word in it.
Oh. So we displace the big terrifying fears onto the little things we feel like we can control.
Exactly. Moral panics are a displacement mechanism. We freak out about the folk devil because it's a manageable target. It makes us feel like we're doing something to maintain order, even if the real threats are totally unrelated.
That is profoundly relatable. It's like stress cleaning your kitchen when you're worried about losing your job. You can't fix the job market, but you can definitely scrub that counter.
That is a perfect analogy. The Black Dahlia case, the comic book hearings, the parental advisory stickers, they are all society stress cleaning the counter while the house is on fire.
Wow. Okay, so let's look at the big picture here. We started with the Black Dahlia, a gruesome reality that was immediately twisted and sold by a sensationalist press.
A press that, as we learned, might actually be less sensational today in terms of volume, but has absolutely mastered the art of the emotional hook.
And that emotional hook feeds directly into these cycles of moral panic. We get scared, we find a target, usually something kids are into, and we try to legislate or shame it out of existence.
Even though the data often shows the threat is minimal or non-existent, comic books didn't cause a rise in 1950s crime. Music lyrics didn't destroy the moral fabric of the 80s.
But the feeling that they were dangerous was real.
And that feeling is what matters to the moral entrepreneurs, the people who build their careers or their organizations on fighting these very battles.
So if we look at this trajectory, from jazz journalism to the Risk Society, it really seems like we are just trapped in a loop.
It does. And remember the findings from that Marchese study. Modern news is rated as more startling and emotional. So if the news is scientifically designed to be more emotionally triggering than ever before, and if moral panics are fueled by anxiety,
Then we are just pouring gasoline on the fire.
exactly, we are potentially living in a state of perpetual manufactured panic.
That is a terrifying thought, but it also gives you a toolkit. Next time you see a headline screaming about the new dangerous trend teens are doing on social media or some new app that's going to destroy civilization,
Ask yourself, is this a real threat? Or is this just another folk devil? Are we trying to protect the walled garden, or are we just trying to feel in control of a world that feels completely chaotic?
the sources suggest that moral panics don't occur when society is stable, but when it is in crisis. So if you're seeing panic everywhere, maybe look at what the real crisis is that nobody is talking about.
And that brings us to a final question for you, the listener. If we are currently living in this risk society, and the news is more emotional than ever, what is the next folk devil currently being constructed that we haven't even noticed yet?
Something to think about while you're scrolling through your feed today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Stay curious.
And stay skeptical. We'll see you next time.